So we're in a series called Finding Jesus, in which we are walking through the book of Luke to find Jesus either for the first time or in a fresh way. Oh, you're not doing that yet. Okay. We're on 19. This is part 19, so we'll get there. But at some point, for the first time, you're going to say, in a fresh way. That's okay, though. You have masks on. It's hard to think clearly without oxygen. So here we go. So this morning, we're at a dinner party. So let's pull up to our place at the table. Verse 36. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him. And Christ went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at table. And behold, a woman who was a sinner in the city, when she learned that Jesus was reclining at table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of perfume. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head and kissed his feet and anointed them with perfume. So this woman is a notorious character in this small city. It's probably Capernaum, maybe Nain. Anyways, all the cities Jesus was ministering to in Galilee are tiny. So you have to, if you think in your mind it's a lot of Jerusalem, that's like rare. It's not his regular. He spends a lot of time in the hinterlands and small communities. And if you've ever been raised in a small community, you know this. There are no secrets that live there. Everybody knows your business. So everybody knows this woman. Just like she knows Jesus. Again, there's a backstory here we're not really privy to, that she knows Jesus. She's certainly heard him preach. She hears that he's at some Pharisee's house and she goes there. So she knows him. Everybody knows her. She's notorious. The fact that they call her a sinner in the city means almost certainly she's a prostitute. Okay, so that's who she is. So set this scene in your mind. Jesus, he's a popular rabbi. He's in the home of a Pharisee who is a hardcore teacher of the Jewish law of order and cleanliness. Here you have a known prostitute who comes to his house, and they're all reclining at a table like this. You know, it's couch cushions on the floor, elbows at the table, feet behind you, and she appears. She comes behind Jesus, she's at his feet, and she begins to wet his feet with her tears and dry them with her hair, and then anoint them with kisses and perfume. That's the scene. But also smell the scene. This is the first century. It's a hot climate, it's not much bathing, and it's poor sanitation. So this is a culture of stench. There's no way around it. Like, I know that Christian art sometimes portrays Jesus as a pretty pristine character, right? Kind of looks Swedish. He has also like an immaculate white robe, kind of blondish brown hair, blue eyes. That's not possible. And he's also maybe wearing that, the beauty pageant sash. That's Jesus. But the reality is Jesus and his crew, for the most part, were pretty poor working guys. So they're a grimy lot. Like his feet in this scene are dirty, not play dirty. So it's a lot of BO and stench. It's a rank room, and this lady uncorks a bottle of perfume, and in the first century, perfume's costly and rare. So it's an obvious act that everybody in the room knows about. She's creating quite a scene by what she's doing. That's what you should feel. And rather than shunning her, Jesus actually lauds her action, which we're going to see. Now the Pharisee who had invited Jesus saw this woman and what she's doing. And he said to himself, these are just his thoughts, if this man were truly a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who's touching him, for she is a sinner. Dangerous, Simon the Pharisee, to think trash about Jesus when he can read your mind, right? There's just no way around it. Here's what Jesus says. He answers Simon his mental thoughts and says, Simon, I have something to say to you. And Simon answered, say it, teacher. Jesus replies, a certain money lender had two debtors, one who owed 500 denarii and the other 50. So think modern debts, $5,000, $50,000. When the debtors could not pay, the money lender canceled or generously forgave the debts. Now, which of the debtors will love the lender more? Simon answered, kind of begrudgingly, like I suppose, the one I suppose for whom he canceled the larger debt. He's no dummy. He gets what's going on. And Jesus said to him, you have judged correctly. Then turning toward the woman, Jesus said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased kissing my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with perfume." These were all acts of honor, which the Pharisee doesn't give Jesus because ultimately he doesn't believe Jesus is fully honorable. "Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. Thus she loves much. For he who is forgiven little loves little." So her actions were the result of experiencing God's forgiveness. I translated it thus. Some translations do it different, because that conjunction can mean either cause or result. It means result here. It's not that she loved God much and then she was forgiven, or she did these really emotional actions. It's because she was forgiven, she loved much. She experienced real grace, and that just can't be corked. It can't stay down. That's how you know a person really experiences God. It comes out. It cannot not come out, right? It becomes generous, and it becomes gratitude. And that's what she experiences. And he's trying to show Simon that he needs that kind of forgiveness, even though he doesn't think he does. And that's the whole problem. He doesn't think he does. So she loves much. And Jesus said to the woman, "Your sins are forgiven." Then those who were at the table with him began to say to themselves, "Who is this that even forgives sins?" Great question. It's a central question. Who is this Jesus who claims to forgive other people's sins? Right? That's what he's doing. So who is he? Great question. In 1997, I was attending the Bemidji State University in Minnesota. One day I was coming back from the gym where I was working out, getting huger, and it's a word when I use it. So I came back, I just parked my car in front of my dorm, parallel parked it. And I got out of the car and looked at the curb, and I saw I'm too far away from the curb. So I set my bag on the lawn, and then I went back into my car to get it closer. And so as I did, just then, two guys from my dorm, who I knew they're from my dorm, but I didn't know them. They didn't know me, but you see, right, the same people. So two guys from the dorm walked by, and just as they did, they saw the bag, they grabbed it, got in their car, and drove away. Then I got in my car, and a high-speed chase ensued. But I lost them. It was a rainy night. I lost them. But here's the thing. They're not the super smartest thieves because I know where they live, right? They're going to come back to the dorm in which they live. So I called my older brother. He called his lifting buddies, and we all waited in the entryway for them. It was like 6 guys, and we're going to give them a welcome home party. And so just as they come back, though, the cops come, and so we don't get any fisticuffs. There's no throwing of hands. And so the cops come and they question these guys, but there's no bag, so there's no proof. So nothing can happen, which is weird because I'm fully wronged in this situation, true? These are the guys. I know these guys. I know they took the bag. They don't have the bag, so there's no proof. And so that's where it has to just sit. Now I'm fully wronged. I mean, in that bag I had my wallet. I had $100, which for a ramen noodle college student is like $1 million. So I felt that dearly. But the worst part is I had all my hard disks, old school, hard disks, with all my college papers on it that I needed for my coursework. So I didn't even care about it. I was like, give me the disks, you dummies. But I couldn't. Now imagine then that, again, that's a full wrong. They have fully wronged me. I'm justified in feeling that they've sinned against me. Let's say that my RA later, these guys approach him, his name is Aaron, they approach Aaron and say, you know what, and they're genuinely repentant. And they're like, we're sorry about that bag. Imagine if Aaron, my RA, says to them, hey, you know what, looks like you're sorry. I just want you to know, don't worry about the bag, Steve forgives you. It's kind of like what Jesus is doing right here. Because this woman, by her sex trade, has damaged houses and homes and marriages, right? And Jesus, it doesn't appear, is directly injured by those things, and yet he extends forgiveness to her. So it seems, frankly, when somebody does that, it seems to the person who's been injured offensive and out of turn, because it seems like only the one who's injured by the offense can extend forgiveness to the offender, right? And Jesus doesn't do that. So the question is, who does he think he is? Right? Who does he think he is in forgiving a person's sin? that has been committed against somebody else? Well, he thinks he's God. That's one of his early claims of divinity is happening right here. He's saying, I am God. I can forgive that sin. Because the truth of sin is that whoever is sinning against whoever, ultimately God is chiefly the injured party. That sounds weird, but any sin committed against anyone, God is always the one chiefly injured by it. And that's sin that's action or just imagined. So think about this hypothetical situation. The best hypothetical you would think is, here's a victimless sin. My neighbor, this is not true, but my neighbor I hate. And I have a lot of hateful, murderous thoughts about this guy. But I don't act upon them, so victimless sin, right? But thoughts matter too. Because God is still affronted by them. Maybe it helps to frame it this way. The concept of sin. When God created the world, he infused it with shalom, or harmony. Sin is a movement against the harmony God created, and really against the God of harmony. That's what makes sin sin. It's the breakdown of harmony. And so when I sin against somebody, I'm damaging God's good creation. And really, if you think about it, humanity is a part of that. And God created us to be like a vineyard, an abundant vineyard that produces fruit. There's harmony there. There's flourishing. Sin, if you extend the metaphor, the imagery, is like Roundup, right? It's like plant killer. And so it breaks down harmony. That's what makes sin sin. So when you look at the Bible and you think, man, there's a lot of old rules here. If you really trace them out, the things that God says don't do that always result in the breakdown of harmony in relationships, in the world's order, and even also in the development of our hearts and minds. That's why even when you don't sin against somebody else, but you sin, it's still an affront to the Creator who made you because you're his vineyard as well. And he's distraught when a heart and a mind is twisted and broken down against itself. So that's slavery, right? It's a slavery when we harbor and develop hate or any number of sins. It's a breakdown. Because really, the most sin we do is usually self-inflicted violence. It's like that vine is reaching out with its branch and turning that bottle of Roundup toward itself and spraying it, and spraying it, and spraying it. That's what sin is. That's why God's against it. It breaks down his DNA for our flourishing. And it always does. Can't get away from it, can't get around it. So even when you sin against you, it's still an affront to the designer and creator of his creation, which you are a part of. So he cares about that too. But it's always God who's the primary injured one by sin. So he also is the one who's able to extend forgiveness over it, right? Just like me with that bag, ultimately, I could extend forgiveness to those guys, right? The cool thing, too, is that God can extend forgiveness. Let's say you've harmed somebody and you came to Christ and you want to make restitution, and you should, and they don't forgive you. God still does, and that's what matters. Maybe you've harmed somebody and they're dead. How do you get restitution? You can't. God can, right? And so God is able to do that, and Jesus makes that claim by saying, I forgive you, lady. I forgive you. So, simply put, if the premise is that God is the creator of your heart and mind, he's distraught to see them become twisted or hardened. Sin is sin because it impedes our design and purpose to flourish. Now, the cool thing is, the power of the gospel is that it overcomes sin, right? It overcomes sin and begins to return us to the flourishing that God intended when he designed things. That's why Jesus came to reconcile creation back to himself, reverse the curse of the fall. And he does that. The cool thing is that's what the gospel does. Now, every culture that the gospel intersects with has both ways that the ground and the people in it are prepared and hardened toward the gospel message. Every culture. When the gospel is brought to that culture, there's ways in which the ground has been prepared but also hardened toward the gospel. So in the first century, think about it. This woman, one of the ways in which she had been prepared for the gospel was she had a felt sense of sin. And really everybody in the culture did. There were absolute truths. The idea that there is wrong, clearly, and it's wrong for everyone. And for this woman, Jesus didn't have to say, hey, you're a sinner, just to let you know you need grace. She's like, I know, everybody tells me. And she knew too. So that's what made her so hungry for acceptance. She'd felt the deep kind of pressure of her sin loading down on her back. Now, the gospel was hardened in that culture in the sense that there was a pretty thick belief that God wants nothing to do with sinners, which Jesus came to pull that hardness away and to show that God actually does want something to do with sinners. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm allowing you to rub my feet and to anoint them. I want relationship with you. To the culture, this lady's trash, irredeemable trash. But not to Jesus. He's like, I came for you. And you get that. It's the sick who need a physician. Those are the people who go for a cure. I'm here for you. I want you. So that culture was prepared, but also hardened. Our culture, similar. There are ways in which our culture is prepared for the gospel and hardened against it. One of the ways it's hardened is the denial of personal sin. So we don't have what the first century had, just this assumption that, there's absolute truths and wrongs that are true for every person in every place. That's a harder hurdle for us. So listening today, because online we have people that listen that I don't know, it's definitely true that there are people listening who would say the concept of sin is old-fashioned and illusory. It's not true. Like, there are things that are right and wrong, but they're culturally conditioned. And so they may be wrong for you, but they're not wrong for me kind of ideas, right? So that's one hurdle that we have. It's just a hard spot in our culture toward the gospel. Now, at the same time, again, the ground's been prepped. We have much more than the first century, a conviction amongst a lot of people in our culture that a unique purpose is important. Like that, think of it, that's a lot of the messaging of our culture. Like, it's important to have a life that matters, right? And also a stable identity. So those are givens in our culture that people want. They don't really, when you get down to the brass tacks, want a system of just materialistic evolution. Like, your life is a mistake. You're here by accident. It doesn't really matter. It's survival of the fittest. So if somebody wrongs you to get ahead, they're just doing what they were conditioned to do. And you're alone. You're alone in this world. There's nothing bigger than you. Ultimately, you'll die. It's a dirt nap that doesn't matter. And that's it for you. Your mistake. Now, that's repulsive to our culture, and it should be because it's not true. And actually, that's where the gospel can come in. The fact that you were created in the image of God. You're absolutely intentionally supposed to be here. God created you to flourish. You're his vineyard. He wants you. Also, the idea that there's a way to have an identity that's stable. If you're past your 30s, even if you're not a Christian, you know this, that if you pursue certain things, they will beat you up and crush you as ultimate. You're looking for a relationship to fulfill you. It will not. There's no spouse who will fill up and be a God for you. And when you seek that, you'll crush that spouse and that relationship. There's no career that ultimately fulfills you, that makes you feel like, I'm stable here. It just doesn't happen. So the gospel allows you to have, first of all, a life of purpose that matters by a God who intentionally knows you and wants you for himself. And also the idea that that can be stable for you. And you're loved by Jesus, and once you're his follower, you're adopted into the family of God, and that is a heritage that will never change and never be threatened. And even as you age, and some of the things that once gave you identity diminish, and they always do. They always do. That doesn't. It actually can grow stronger, even in your aches and pains. I heard one lady say this who had chronic pain, and somebody asked her, she was a Christian, how you doing today, Doris? And Doris said, I don't have anything that the resurrection can't fix. What a cool attitude. I don't have anything that the resurrection can't fix. And it's true for her. She understands that this life isn't all there is. We will someday have a new body existing in a new heavens and a new earth, still doing vocations, but with complete flow and flourishing. That's what we have ahead of us. And it's partly now as well. That identity, that purpose is right now. That's the good news, even in our culture that says, sin, not so sure. You feel the effects of sin, even if you won't name it as such. That's okay. God is patient. What's really cool and awesome and reassuring is that God is both willing and able to overcome any hurdle of hardness in a culture. He can do that. He'll just blow right through that. For this lady, she's like, I am garbage. God's like, nope, you're not. I'm here for you. In this culture, sin, I don't know, that's not real. It is. And God will show that to you. as he draws you to himself. Because without a felt sense of sin, you don't have gratitude for grace. It's not an amazing thing for you that you've been forgiven if you don't think you really have anything that needs forgiving, or you don't think you have any slavery, or you're not taking the Roundup and squirting yourself. You already feel it. He just helps you own it. That's what God does, which is awesome. The verse and chapter, not the chapter, I think the chapter ends there too, but ends this way. So here's the scene, here's the situation. Jesus says to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Here's a transformed woman, right? And Jesus pronounces God's righteousness over her. It's pretty amazing. What's kind of weird is he sends her away, remarkably, with very little instruction, right? Now, again, because they are in small communities, she's going to see Jesus again. Almost certainly, she's going to sit at his feet and be taught by him, and probably is one of the members of the first church, the early church. So it's not done for her. But in this scene, it seems like Jesus is just sending her out, like, go home, they're good. It doesn't give her a lot of instruction, like, hey, stop being a prostitute. You want to stop that? Or like, make amends for your sin. He just sends her out, which kind of makes sense because when you've truly been saved, when you've experienced salvation, like the crossing from death to life and new life in Jesus, a lot of that stuff is intuitively true. And the conviction and the capability to live into those things, it comes in the power of the gospel, of being accepted by God. So the power to turn away from obvious sin is just there. So she doesn't have to be told, like, don't still use your body in a way that disrespects yourself and harms God's flourishing. Like, she gets that. Also making amends. I mean, think about Zacchaeus. He's a tax collector. The culture's telling him he's a sinner all the time. He's embezzling money, so he is sinning. When he comes to Christ, he's like, right away, boom, Jesus, if I defrauded anyone, I'll just pay that back 4 times as much. It's just natural. It's a natural response when you've experienced God's generous love and sacrifice for you to bring you back to life, to just let that out generously. So people that come to Christ should seek to make amends for their sin. I mean, if you have to be goaded into that, I don't think you've experienced grace. You will seek amends for your sin because you're just like, I've been forgiven. I'm going to own that. I was totally wrong with that. I was hard-hearted, or I was selfish, or whatever it is. You'll just have a power generation to do that by experiencing God's grace. You'll seek to make amends. And the things that you know are evil in your life, you'll have a deep conviction. I need to turn away from that. That's not the pathway of flourishing. And for this woman, you get that she has a repurposed vocation. You get little hints of it even in her interaction with Jesus at the dinner party. Think about this. Maybe you've never thought about it before with this passage if you've read it. But for this woman, she's using the former tools of her trade as a prostitute to serve and honor Christ. Her lips, her hair, her perfume, those are all tools of the trade for a prostitute. And she just repurposes them right there to honor and serve Jesus. That's what God does. When he brings a person fully alive, he doesn't usually just strip away all their giftings. He just repurposes those for his honor, their dignity, and the blessings of other people. That's shalom. That's what he's doing with this woman. Now, I don't know, again, how her story plays out because we don't get that. But you see that over and over again. When God brings a person fully alive, he just repurposes what he's given them so that they would use it for his glory, the blessings of others, and dignity. My favorite blues singer is this guy, Johnny Lang. Anyone heard of Johnny Lang? Okay, just Brian. Well, you guys are lame. Anyways, he grew up kind of not so far from me, so I knew about him for a long time, but he's a blues singer, and he experienced incredible success at a really young age. He started playing the guitar at 13. By 17, he hit a platinum song and won a Grammy. Now, that's pretty much a big God thing. Like, you don't have that kind of gifting like, I've been playing 4 years. So super popular, super young, 17 years old, started touring with bands like the Rolling Stones and Aerosmith and B.B. King, and lots of fame really early, and delved really deeply into hardcore substance abuse really early on. Now, he'd been raised in a church background in North Dakota, but had rejected that faith, never was a follower of Jesus, right? So he got into drugs, alcohol, witchcraft, really hardcore cat. And then at some point, and he's in his 20s, he's in the backyard of his friend's house in California, and he has an experience of God. And here's what he writes about it. This is in 2006. He's writing in his biography. He says this about experiencing God. All of a sudden, I got hit in the stomach with a tremendous force. It was almost like I had to throw up. I couldn't keep it down any longer. Bursting out of my mouth came the word, Jesus, right in the middle of our conversation. The power of God hit me so hard, it was like somebody grabbed my shoulders and shook me back and forth. It didn't hurt, but it was violent. Yet at the same time, I felt total peace. God didn't say, hey, this is Jesus, but I knew it was him. I heard him say to me, you don't have to have this if you don't want it. I was completely and utterly amazed, and I definitely wanted it. I wanted it more than anything I'd ever wanted in my whole life. I kept shaking until I fell to the ground. I gave my life to Christ right at that moment. While I was lying on the grass, it's very much similar to the prostitute. While I was lying on the grass, a film strip was playing in my mind. Memories of all the times I'd persecuted Christians came clearly into focus. At a funeral a few days later, I confessed publicly that Jesus was my Lord and Savior. My friends almost fell off their chairs. What's so miraculous about this whole experience is that I had not been pursuing God. I despised him. I was living with total hostility toward God, and he still loved me and delivered me. That's God, right? That's what has to happen for a person to know Jesus. Not all this dramatic stuff, but some sort of clarity that, you know what, the God I've been scorning or denying his existence or relativizing away is real. The most convincing reason I know he's real is that I know the person I was before I met him. I know the way I thought and the way I conducted my life. The old person was replaced with a brand new one, a person who is willing to conform to the image of Christ. That's amazing. All the sermons in the world could not have convinced me of that, but he convinced me himself, and I know the truth. Jesus is the living God. Boom. And he's right. All the sermons in the world won't do that work for you. Now, God can work through sermons, but even right now, if a person's watching this or you yourself, God must show you God. He must show you that he's real. No matter what our culture says about him or the fact that we don't need him, God must show up and show you God. And even in a hard situation like Johnny Lang's, God is able. And that's what we're praying for. Like, we're going to have some time at the Forge. That's what we're praying for yourself or other people that you know who don't yet know Christ, and the freedom that he alone offers by the work he did for you on the cross so that you and God could walk in shalom again. Like, he does that, but he has to show that to us and cut through all the lies and the smoke. But he can do that, which is awesome. I mean, what a cool story. And then when Johnny came to life in Christ, it's not like all of his musical gifts were stripped away so that he could become a pastor. Nope. And what took place is he became a redemptive person in the blues community. And you see that. I've been to like 5 of his concerts. When you're there, like, his faith, he never beats you over the head with it. For eyes, people that have eyes to see or ears to hear, you get it. Like, he usually sings one song with some faith in there. You get it. You know, like, it's about something else, right? That's the pathway of his flourishing that God created before time began. Think about that. Before time began, Johnny Lang was going to be a person with incredible musical ability who used it to serve and honor the God of the universe. That's just the way it goes. So let's go to the Forge. So what's your story? Have you been forgiven much so that you love God much? Again, the elements aren't going to be probably dramatic. Every story is different. But it's just like falling in love with somebody, truly. When you do, you know it's happened. That's the way with God. Like, if you are a reborn son or daughter of God, you get that. You brought from a place of your own sufficiency to dependence and forgiveness in God's love and his forgiveness, then you know it. And if you haven't, then this would be a great time to think about it. No matter where you are or what you've thought about God in the past, God breaks through by the power of his Holy Spirit. So that's a great thing. We'd love for you to think about that as well. God alone has the power to generously cancel sin with his own sacrifice. So here are the questions for the Forge. First, have you been forgiven much with the result that you love God much? That's where love comes from for God. He knows me, who I am. He understands the sin. He's come to provide freedom and to take over, and I want that. So if that's not you, I'd love that to be the case for you to think and as we pray to give your life to Christ, no matter where you're at. Say, God, just come and take over. I need you. I can't do it on my own. Second thing, if you sense, so you might be a Christian, have been for a while, if you sense you're caught in the claws of a pattern of sin, will you talk to somebody about it today? That's such a good question. See, the power of sin is this. Sin would love to have you isolated. Sin's great power is isolation. So sin would love to have you isolated with your struggle in a dark corner, thinking like you and your struggle, you're so hideous that you could never share that with anyone. That's how it lies to you. That's the power of sin, to get you alone, to get you isolated, to put you on an island, and to keep you there. Well, what begins to break the back of sin and loosen its control over you is to bring it from the darkness into the light. And one of the ways that you do that is to talk to somebody else about that. Say, will you pray with me? Here's what I'm going through. I have to do that with Michelle. Like, there are times I'm like, I'm watching this show. It's not helpful. Would you please remind me not to watch this? It steals from my joy and robs from my purpose. See, that's what sin does, right? It steals from your joy and robs from your purpose. Christians are not your enemy. They're your allies. Sin is your enemy. And it would love to have you alone. So I just encourage you, like, if you're struggling with something and only you know that, begin to break the back of that struggle by sharing that with somebody, and you will not be condemned. There's nothing in you that the person you're talking to either hasn't struggled with or has every capacity to fall into themselves, right? So, great. 2 questions to think through for this next 3 minutes. We're actually going to play a Johnny Lang song, which will close us for the sermon before I come up with the benediction. It's his testimony set to music. I don't know if you're into blues music. If you're not, this doesn't sound like blues music. He has a super high range, so it's kind of quiet and high. But we'll have the lyrics as well. But just reflect. If you don't like the music, just close it out. But think through these questions. Have you been forgiven much so you love much? Are you dealing with a pattern of sin that has its claws on you? See, sin always starts off like a rabbit. You hold it and it's soft and it becomes a cougar. It's got its hooks in your back and it will hold you. So be free. So a couple of things to think about. We'll let Johnny sing. Here's some lyrics, and then I'll do the benediction, but let's meet with God.